The night hung in perfect silence, and fear quaked through Tracer as he walked. Passing a dug fir tree, he stopped at the top of the rocky bluff above the jagged protrusions of granite that fingered skyward as if there were some glory up there somewhere. Tracer peered into the darkness. With his eyes as wide as he could open them, he searched for the blue shimmer the fabric makes when it's about to rip. He remembered waving goodbye for the last time to Sergeant Kagrimpa as the fabric sealed them apart. Kagrimpa had been the first one Tracer met when he discovered the rips in the fabric at 4 years old. It was fitting that he be the last Tracer saw from that world as it closed up that final time. Tracer and the others had passed back and forth through the fabric on countless occasions. Tracer's understanding of their country as a mirror of his life had solidified over the years through the adventures he'd had in his room, but not in his room, in safety, but not in safety. Tracer thought he might always have the Order and his friends until that last year when he noticed that going back and forth had begun to change. Each time the rips grew a little smaller, slightly harder to find. Each time when he tried, he wondered if he might be able to create a rip at all. When he said goodbye that last time, they discovered that the fabric had already sealed in front of the closet where they'd come through. Kagrimpa, Longatow, and Spantha were stuck on this side, and themselves started to shimmer into non-existence. They had to find another rip, so they all tiptoed past his mom and dad, who were arguing at the time, and slipped outside to the front gate. Tracer chose to look for a rip at the front gate because at the time it was the only place he was afraid to go alone. Tracer assumed the fabric had to be thin there, and sure enough, they found a tear and slipped back through, back into the Order, where they swore the war was almost over, where they swore they had all but won. They had been claiming for months that the mighty Order was mopping up the last holdouts. The armies of the Order had pushed the darkness back and into inevitable surrender. Peace was finally at hand. "Good luck, boy Trace," Kagrimpa said, waving goodbye as Tracer stood there crying in the night as time marched on around him, as all things marched on around him. "Goodbye!" Tracer screamed as the fabric sealed them away from him. He could hear his mom and dad fighting inside behind him, and he felt the pit in his stomach as the last translucent flicks and pops of the fabric disappeared. The last few times Tracer had gone through, he told the others that he wanted to join the army. Mr. Longatow had repeatedly told Tracer that the Order's army didn't accept humans unless they were at least 8 years old. You have to be able to swing a sword or shoot a crossbow. Human children are just too puny to be useful as soldiers. Look at you! Mr. Longatow poked Tracer in the ribs. The truth, however, according to Kagrimpa, was that the Order didn't even need the standing army it already had. The Order had all but crushed the darkness, as the darkness waged fruitless battles against the mighty Order's almost unimaginable faculties. The war had gone so well that much of the Order had already declared victory and danced in the streets. Huge parades of thick confetti and music had broken out from Silentium to Port of Gone, or so Mr. Longatow had also boasted while lounging by the campfire. Seeing his old friends would be refreshing, Tracer had decided. They would bring happiness and order, no chaos, no lies, a world of peace, of victory, of splendid, wonderful structure. Tracer caught the sight of the slight sheen of fraying fabric, and his heart leapt. He gazed through the taut fraying curls and wisps materializing around him. "Kagrimpa! Mr. Longatow! Are you there? Spantha?" He listened for them but heard nothing. He cupped his hands to his mouth and yelled their names. Still nothing until through the sheen he heard a long, high-pitched whistle. The tremolo of the fabric picked up. It was about to rip. The crisp note of the whistle grew louder, and blue spread in every direction as the fabric thinned to crepe paper. "Strange it doesn't rip," he whispered as he adjusted his footing atop the forbidden bluff. As if some force unknown had lain a trap, something gave beneath the snow and the firmness slipped out from under his weight. He screamed and flailed his arms, swallowed by the sensation of falling. Then he heard a loud rip as he reached to grip anything at all. Suddenly the clouds above snapped red and then dissolved away to reveal a clear black sky and the stark white stars of a cloudless night. One fiery streak arched across the sky above him. Now he found himself laying flat on his back, staring up as the blazing streak became 2, then 8, then maybe 50. The fuzz that was his muted hearing picked up the whistle again. Then he heard a single scream carry over the snow. "Incoming!" The sky abruptly snapped full of clouds again as if someone had elbowed the reset button on a video game. Suddenly he could feel rocks jagged and angry beneath his back and his head and a hot twisting sensation in his temple. He tried to scream and something animal came out of him, loud and wet, frothing and horrible. The sky again flashed clear of clouds, and the streaks of light were now plunging into the ground around him with bright flashes as they hit, heaving great plumes of earth skyward. Concussion waves slashed through the ground beneath him. "Retreat!" he heard another voice. "Incoming rockets! Retreat!" And directly beside him on the ground someone flopped. Tracer knew who this was, though only the glint of light from the pendant around the figure's neck was visible. This was the third time he'd seen light bounce off that object that night. It was the amarylite pendant that Kagrimpa wore. The flash of an explosion illuminated his old friend laying on the muddy ground. Kagrimpa bawled and covered his face and ears with his paws as yet another rocket hit the earth not 50 yards away. "Kagrimpa!" Tracer screamed as the flash thrashed at his eyes and dirt and rocks rained down them like precious western rain. Kagrimpa clutched a satchel with one paw and half-dazed he gaped at Tracer. "Boy Trace, my God! What are you doing here?" "I don't know. I came through to find you guys." A rocket jabbed into the earth closer now, not 20 yards away. The blast flung both of them like rag dolls. Kagrimpa moaned, but when Tracer opened his eyes, above him was not the battle, but the cloudy, quiet night and the face of the bluff reaching up, forbidden and dangerous. He could feel his arm twisting in broken ways beneath him. He bellowed the animal sound as loud as he could before the clouds snapped away again and the sky filled with stars and more streaming rockets. "Come on!" Kagrimpa leapt up and grabbed Tracer's hand, yanking him to his feet. Tracer could see very clearly Kagrimpa's long coyote snout and brownish-gray fur. He wore a satchel bound under his arm like a baby in a sling. Around his waist, a belt and a scabbard that sheathed a typical Roman-style short sword. Tracer trailed Kagrimpa as they ran parallel to the incoming rockets striping overhead. "We have to get into the mountains!" Tracer plodded over the uneven ground behind his friend. "Kagrimpa, where are Spantha and Mr. Longatow?" he screamed as Kagrimpa bounded ahead of him. "In due time! We have to get off the front!" he yelled as they ran. The booms and flashes moved off behind. The flatness of the ground began to slope up as the prairie turned into mountain. Their pace slackened. "Dear God, I'm getting too old for this," Kagrimpa puffed as they reached the Ponderosa thicket line. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," he yelled back to Tracer. "I didn't either," Tracer said as Kagrimpa flopped his back to a tree and panted, clutching the satchel as though it might sprout legs and run off. Tracer clumped against a tree as well, and he peered down at the battlefield below. The disarray of the retreat shone evident in the chaos of the line opposite the batteries of rockets that coughed volley after volley. "The darkness," Kagrimpa said. "They managed a surprise attack, the blasted mongrels." "The darkness? But the orders smeared them out last year." "We all thought that, Boy Trace," he panted. "Come on!" He motioned up the mountain. "They'll be tracking us soon if they aren't already, and intel reports from earlier today say they're using a monstrous troop of—" He stopped himself and shook his head. "All in due time, Boy Trace. Now we have to get up into the mountains as far south as we can get." Tracer squinted down at the messy retreat of the Order's army caught in yet another barrage of rockets. Tracer spotted a unit moving fast, perfectly equidistant between the two armies. Kagrimpa saw it too. "Oh no, God help us," he muttered. "It's them! We have to run!" He tore up the mountain ahead of Tracer. "Come on, Boy Trace! Run as if your guts depend upon it! Because they do!"